The smell of diesel fuel and hot asphalt had been Alexander Irving's morning cologne for longer than he cared to remember. But standing in the climate-controlled boardroom of Irving Construction Group's headquarters, 50 stories above Manhattan, he could barely recall those days when he'd wake up at 4 in the morning to work demolition sites for minimum wage. Alexander ran his hand along the polished mahogany conference table, his calloused fingers a permanent reminder of where he'd come from, even as everything around him screamed of where he'd arrived. "Mr. Irving, the Pemberton representatives are here," his assistant Marcus announced from the doorway. Alexander nodded, straightening his tie. The Pemberton account could mean expanding his construction empire into luxury resort development, a sector he'd been eyeing for 2 years. He'd built his company from nothing, starting with a single crew doing small residential jobs, and now Irving Construction Group handled projects worth hundreds of millions. But luxury resorts were different territory, and the Pembertons were old money, the kind of family that had been wealthy for so many generations they'd forgotten what it felt like to worry about anything. The door opened, and 3 people walked in. Alexander recognized Harold Pemberton from the preliminary meetings, a silver-haired man in his 60s who carried himself with the casual confidence of inherited wealth. Beside him was his son, Richard, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. And then there was her. She walked in last, carrying a leather portfolio, her dark hair pulled back in a way that was professional but couldn't quite hide how striking she was. She wore a navy suit that probably cost more than Alexander's first car, but there was something about the way she moved that suggested she wasn't just decoration at this meeting. Her green eyes scanned the room with sharp intelligence before landing on him. "Alexander Irving," Harold said warmly, extending his hand. "Good to see you again. I'd like you to meet my daughter, Zara Nielson. She's our chief financial officer and the real brains behind this expansion." Zara stepped forward and shook his hand. Her grip was firm, businesslike. "Mr. Irving, I've read extensively about Irving Construction Group. Your trajectory over the past decade has been remarkable." "I've had good timing and better luck," Alexander said, which was only partially true. The reality was thousands of 18-hour days, countless risks, and the kind of relentless drive that came from knowing what it meant to have nothing. "I doubt luck had much to do with it," Zara replied, and there was something in her tone that suggested she understood hard work, even if their starting points had been universes apart. They settled around the conference table, and for the next 2 hours, Alexander presented his vision for the Pemberton Resort project. He'd done his homework, studying luxury hospitality trends, understanding what made high-end guests willing to spend thousands per night. Zara asked pointed questions about timelines, material costs, labor allocation, and contingency planning. She wasn't just knowledgeable, she was formidable, catching details that her father and brother had missed entirely. "Your subcontractor network is impressive," Zara said, flipping through the documentation he'd provided. "But I notice you're proposing to bring in teams from outside the region for specialized work. Have you calculated the additional costs for housing and transportation?" Alexander met her eyes. "Page 47. I've budgeted for temporary housing and a meal stipend. It's still more cost-effective than using local contractors who charge premium rates because they know we're on a tight timeline." Something flickered across her face, approval maybe. "You've thought this through." "I don't present half-baked plans, Miss Nielson." "It's Mrs." Harold started to say, but Zara cut him off smoothly. "It's Miss Nielson, actually. And I appreciate thoroughness, Mr. Irving. We've looked at 4 other firms, and frankly, none of them have demonstrated this level of detailed planning." The meeting concluded with Harold suggesting they take a few days to review everything. But Alexander could tell from Zara's body language that she was already convinced. As they stood to leave, she lingered while her father and brother headed toward the elevators. "I want to visit some of your completed projects," Zara said. "Not the showcase properties you put in your marketing materials. Real sites where your teams are currently working." Alexander raised an eyebrow. Most construction sites aren't exactly set up for visitors in Valentino suits. "I own Boots, Mr. Irving, and I believe in seeing how potential partners actually operate, not just how they present themselves in boardrooms." She pulled out her phone. "Are you free Thursday morning?" There was something refreshing about her directness. Most people with her background wanted nothing to do with the messy reality of construction work. "I'm on site in Queens at 7. It's a mixed-use development, residential and commercial. We're in the middle phase. Text me the address." She handed him a business card with her personal cell number written on the back in neat handwriting. "I'll be there at 7. Thursday morning arrived cold and overcast, the kind of November weather that threatened rain. Alexander had been at the Queens site since 6, doing a final walk-through with his site supervisor to make sure everything was running smoothly. He wasn't sure if Zara would actually show up. Plenty of executives talked about wanting to see the real work, but bailed when faced with the early morning start time and the reality of an active construction zone. At 6:58, a black town car pulled up, and Zara stepped out wearing jeans, work boots, and a canvas jacket. Her hair was in a simple ponytail, and she looked considerably different from the polished executive he'd met in the boardroom. She also looked younger, and he found himself wondering about her age, her story, how she'd ended up as CFO of a family empire. "Miss Nielson," he greeted her, handing over a hard hat and safety glasses. "Ready for the real show, lead the way." He took her through the site, explaining the project timeline, showing her how his crews worked, introducing her to his foreman. She asked questions constantly, not just about the construction process, but about his workers, their training, their safety protocols, how he handled problems when they arose. At one point, she stopped to talk with one of his electricians, a guy named Carlos who'd been with Alexander since the early days. "How long have you worked for Irving Construction?" Zara asked him. 8 years, Carlos said, adjusting his tool belt. "Started as a general laborer. Boss paid for my apprenticeship and licensing." "That's unusual. Most companies don't invest that much in training," Carlos grinned. "Mr. Irving's different. He came up the same way we did. He gets it." After Carlos headed back to work, Zara turned to Alexander. "You pay for training and certification." "When I see potential, yes. Good workers are hard to find and loyalty matters. Most of my senior people started at entry level." He paused, then decided to be honest. "I started as a demolition worker making $8 an hour. I know what it's like to want a chance and not be able to afford the certifications that would get you there." Zara studied him with those sharp green eyes. "My father mentioned you were self-made, but I didn't realize the full extent. Does it matter? It makes me trust you more, actually. You built something real. You understand value because you've had to create it yourself." They walked through the rest of the site, and Alexander found himself enjoying her company more than he'd expected. She was genuinely interested, not performing interest for business purposes. When they finished the tour, rain had started falling in earnest, and they ducked into a construction trailer to wait it out. "Coffee," Alexander offered, gesturing to the industrial-sized pot that was always brewing on site. "Please." He poured 2 cups into slightly battered mugs. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, the way construction workers preferred it. Zara took a sip and didn't flinch. "You know, she said, settling into one of the folding chairs. Most people assume I got my position because my last name is Nielson. Did you? She laughed, and it was a genuine sound, nothing practiced about it. Fair question. Partially, yes. My father gave me the opportunity, but I have an MBA from Wharton, and I've been working in the family business since I was 22. I've had to prove myself twice as hard because of my last name, not despite it. How old are you now? The question came out before he could think better of it. 29. You, 33. Alexander leaned against the desk. And for what it's worth, I don't care how you got the position. You clearly know what you're doing. Your questions in that meeting were sharper than anyone else's in the room, including my father's, especially your father's. No offense. Zara smiled into her coffee cup. None taken. My father's brilliant with vision and relationships. Numbers and details make him glaze over. That's why he brought me into the business. Richard's the same way. They're big picture people. And you're the one who makes the big picture actually work. Exactly. She looked up at him. You're the same way, aren't you? You can do the vision thing, clearly, but you're also in the details. That's rare. When you grow up with nothing, you learn that details matter. One mistake, one miscalculation, and you're back to nothing. I couldn't afford to be careless. The rain drummed against the trailer roof, creating a cocoon of sound around them. Zara set down her coffee and crossed her arms, studying him with an intensity that should have made him uncomfortable but somehow didn't. Tell me something, Alexander. Why do you want the Pemberton project? You could keep doing what you're doing, building residential and commercial in the city. It's clearly working for you. Luxury resorts are a different world. He considered his answer carefully. Because I'm not done yet. I'm proud of what I've built, but I didn't claw my way up from demolition crews to play it safe. The resort market is challenging, but that's the point. I want to build things that last, things that matter. And maybe I want to prove that someone from my background can handle the same projects as the companies with century-old reputations. That's honest. You asked. Zara stood, walking to the trailer window to watch the rain. I'm going to recommend to my father that we hire Irving Construction Group. Your numbers are competitive. Your timeline is realistic, and after seeing this site, I believe you can deliver quality work. But more than that, I trust you. That matters more than people realize in partnerships like this. I appreciate that. She turned back to face him. This will be an 18-month project minimum. We'll be working closely together. I need to know you can handle feedback and pressure. My father might be hands-off, but I'm not. I'll be involved in every major decision. I wouldn't want it any other way. Partners who don't care enough to push back are partners who don't care about the outcome. Good. She checked her phone. I should get going, but Alexander, one more thing. This project, if we move forward, it's not just business for my family. This is my mother's dream. She passed away 3 years ago, and before she died, she made us promise we'd build this resort. She had sketches, ideas, a whole vision. So when I'm being demanding or particular, understand it's because this matters on a personal level. The vulnerability in her admission shifted something between them. Alexander nodded. Then we'll make sure it's perfect. Not just good, perfect. Over the next 2 weeks, Alexander found himself thinking about Zara Nielson far more than was professionally appropriate. She'd called to confirm that the Pemberton family was moving forward with Irving Construction Group. And since then, they'd been in constant communication about contracts, timelines, and preliminary planning. Every conversation revealed more layers to her, more intelligence, more drive, more humor than he'd expected from someone who'd grown up in mansions and attended private schools. The first official planning meeting was scheduled at the Pemberton estate in Connecticut. Alexander made the drive on a gray December morning, following GPS directions that took him increasingly far from anything resembling normal civilization. The Nielson estate, where Zara apparently lived with her father since her mother's death, was at the end of a tree-lined private road, a sprawling stone mansion that looked like it had been transplanted from an English countryside. A housekeeper answered the door and led him to a study where Zara was waiting, surrounded by architectural plans and fabric samples. She looked up when he entered, and her face brightened with a smile that did complicated things to his heart rate. Alexander, perfect timing. I've been trying to make decisions about interior aesthetics, and it's making me crazy. Tell me honestly, does this tile look elegant or pretentious? She held up a sample that looked like marble carved by angels. That's like asking me to choose between champagne brands. It all looks expensive. She laughed. Fair. But seriously, my mother's sketches show she wanted elegance without ostentation. Finding that balance is harder than it sounds. Alexander moved closer to look at the design spread across the table. He could see Zara's notes in the margins, questions about materials, cost comparisons, practicality concerns. Show me what your mother envisioned. Zara pulled out a worn leather journal filled with watercolor sketches and handwritten notes. The designs were beautiful, sophisticated but warm, the kind of spaces that would make people feel welcomed rather than intimidated by luxury. As Zara explained her mother's vision, her voice softened, filled with affection and grief that was still clearly fresh. She sounds like she was remarkable, Alexander said quietly. She was. She grew up middle class, actually. Met my father at college. Her family thought she was marrying up, but really my father was the lucky one. She kept him grounded, kept all of us grounded. Made sure Richard and I understood that wealth was a responsibility, not just a privilege. Zara touched the edge of the journal gently. I miss her every day. My mother died when I was 19, Alexander found himself saying. She worked 2 jobs trying to keep us afloat after my father left. Never saw me build any of this. Sometimes I think about what she'd say if she could see it. Zara looked up at him, and there was understanding in her eyes, the kind of recognition that only comes from shared loss. She'd be proud. Even if she couldn't say it, she'd be proud. They worked through the afternoon, making decisions about materials and layouts, debating the merits of different design choices. Harold and Richard joined them for dinner, a surprisingly casual meal in the estate's kitchen rather than a formal dining room. The housekeeper, a woman named Marie who clearly treated Zara like a daughter, served pot roast and vegetables while asking pointed questions about whether Zara was eating enough and sleeping properly. Marie, I'm fine, Zara protested, but there was affection in her exasperation. You work too much, Marie said firmly. Just like your mother, she never knew when to rest either. After dinner, Harold and Richard excused themselves to watch a basketball game, and Zara offered to show Alexander the grounds. It was cold outside, their breath fogging in the air as they walked past carefully manicured gardens dormant for winter. I should warn you, Zara said. My father's already planning to invite you to Christmas dinner. He likes you, and once Harold Pemberton decides he likes someone, he's aggressively friendly about it. Alexander smiled. That doesn't sound terrible. You say that now. Wait until he's cornering you at parties to introduce you to everyone he's ever met. She paused. But seriously, if that's overwhelming, I can deflect. He means well, but he doesn't always understand boundaries. Zara, I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment with my mother and 3 siblings. The idea of having space to throw parties is pretty foreign to me. I'm not easily overwhelmed by wealthy people being friendly. She stopped walking and turned to face him. Can I ask you something personal? Sure. Do you ever feel like you don't belong in your own life? Like you'll wake up and be back where you started and all of this will have been temporary? The question was so honest, so unexpected that Alexander took a moment to answer. Every day. I've been successful for years now, but I still have nightmares about being broke, about losing everything and having to start over. I don't think that feeling ever goes away completely. I feel that way too, but in reverse, Zara admitted. I'm terrified I'll never be seen as anything but Harold Nielsen's daughter, that everything I accomplish will be attributed to my last name and my family's money. Sometimes I want to walk away from all of it, build something entirely my own just to prove I could. Why don't you? Because it's not just about me. This was my mother's world, and finishing her resort project, continuing her legacy, that matters more than my ego. She smiled slightly. Also, I'm pragmatic enough to know that having resources is better than not having them. I just wish I'd earned them myself. You're earning them now. Every decision you make, every project you oversee, that's you, not your last name. They stood there in the cold garden, and Alexander was acutely aware of how close they were standing, how the moonlight caught in her dark hair, how her green eyes reflected the light from the house. He was also aware that she was his client, that her family was trusting him with a multi-million-dollar project, that this was probably the worst possible time to acknowledge the attraction he'd been feeling since she walked into his boardroom. Zara seemed to be having similar thoughts because she stepped back slightly. We should head inside. Marie will have hot chocolate ready. It's a house tradition on cold nights. They walked back to the house, and the moment passed, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of connection that went beyond professional respect. January brought brutal weather and the official start of the Pemberton Resort project. Alexander's crews began site preparation in upstate New York, where the resort would be built on 200 acres of forested land overlooking a lake. The location was spectacular, isolated enough to feel like an escape, but accessible enough for wealthy guests who wanted luxury without roughing it. Zara was on site constantly, which Alexander told himself was fine, normal, exactly what he'd expected from her. What he hadn't expected was how much he looked forward to seeing her, how their working relationship had evolved into something that felt like friendship, or maybe more than friendship if he was being honest with himself. She'd shown up one freezing morning with coffee and breakfast sandwiches for his entire crew, casually mentioning that she'd been up early anyway. Another day, she'd worked alongside his architect to solve a drainage problem, getting her hands dirty quite literally as they examined soil samples and elevation changes. His workers loved her, charmed by her lack of pretension and her genuine interest in what they were doing. "Boss is different when she's around," Carlos observed one afternoon when Zara had left to drive back to the city. "What do you mean?" Alexander asked, knowing exactly what he meant. "You smile more. Also, you actually leave on time when she suggests it instead of working until midnight." "She's a client. We're maintaining a good working relationship." Carlos gave him a look that suggested Alexander wasn't fooling anyone. "Whatever you say, boss." The problem was, Alexander knew Carlos was right. He was falling for Zara Nielson, and it was possibly the most inconvenient thing that had ever happened to him. She was from a completely different world, born into the kind of wealth and privilege he'd spent his life trying to achieve. The idea that they could ever be anything other than professional colleagues seemed absurd. Except every conversation, they had suggested otherwise. Every shared laugh, every moment when their eyes met across a construction site or conference table, every late-night phone call ostensibly about the project that turned into discussions about their lives, their dreams, their fears. In February, a major storm hit, delaying construction by 2 weeks and creating a cascade of scheduling problems. Alexander was in his office late on a Friday night, trying to reorganize the timeline when his phone rang. Zara's name appeared on the screen. "Please tell me you have good news," he answered. "I have Chinese food and a bottle of wine. Does that count?" Her voice was tired but warm. "Where are you?" "Downstairs in your building's lobby. Security is giving me suspicious looks. Can you let me in?" 10 minutes later, Zara was in his office, unpacking containers of food and setting out paper plates. She'd clearly come straight from another meeting, still wearing a dress and heels, but she'd kicked off the shoes and was padding around his office in bare feet like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I figured you'd still be here," she said, "trying to solve problems that can't actually be solved until the weather clears. The timeline is a disaster." The timeline was always aggressive. "We'll adjust. Alexander, sit down and eat before you make yourself crazy." They ate sitting on the floor of his office, too tired to bother with proper furniture. The wine helped, mellowing the stress that had been building for days. Outside, the city glittered with lights, oblivious to their small drama of construction delays and scheduling conflicts. "Can I ask you something?" Zara said, refilling their wine glasses. "You always do." "Why construction? I mean, I understand you got into it because you needed work, but you stayed in it, built a whole empire." Why? Alexander considered his answer. "Because building things is honest work. You can see what you've accomplished. At the end of a project, there's something real that exists because you made it exist. I like that. I like that it's tangible. And that it's yours, something no one can take away from you. That too." He looked at her. "Why finance? Why not something more creative or public-facing like your father and brother?" "Because numbers don't lie. People can spin stories, manipulate narratives, but balance sheets tell the truth. I like truth. I like knowing exactly where things stand." She paused. "Also, I'm good at it, and being good at something matters when you're constantly trying to prove yourself. You've proven yourself, Zara. Everyone can see that. Everyone except me sometimes." She leaned back against his office couch. "Do you ever get tired of working this hard? Of always pushing for the next thing? Honestly?" "No. I'm terrified of what happens if I stop. If I stop moving forward, I might slide backward." "What if you're already somewhere worth staying?" The question hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the surface words. Alexander met her eyes and saw the same confusion and attraction he'd been fighting for months reflected back at him. "Zara," he started, but she held up her hand. "Don't. If you're going to say something about how we should keep things professional, save it. I know. I know all the reasons this is complicated. But I'm so tired of pretending I don't look forward to seeing you every day. I'm tired of manufacturing reasons to call you. I'm tired of lying to myself about what I'm feeling." Alexander's heart was pounding hard enough that he was sure she could hear it. "You're my client. Your family trusted me with a project that matters to them personally. I can't jeopardize that. So we wait. We finish the project and then we see what this is." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not saying we act on this now. I'm just saying let's stop pretending it doesn't exist." He should have agreed immediately, should have been relieved she was being reasonable. Instead, he found himself moving closer to her, drawn by something stronger than professional ethics or good sense. "I can't stop thinking about you," he admitted. "Every time my phone rings, I hope it's you. Every time I solve a problem on the project, the first thing I want to do is tell you about it. You're the last thing I think about before I fall asleep, and the first thing I think about when I wake up." Zara's breath caught. "Alexander, I know we should wait. I know we should be careful, but I need you to know that this isn't just attraction or convenience. You're extraordinary, and not because of your last name or your family's money, because of who you are when it's just us. Because you're brilliant and driven, and you understand things about me that I've never told anyone else." She closed the distance between them, and then she was kissing him, and Alexander forgot every reason why this was a bad idea. She tasted like wine and hope and possibility, and when her hands slid into his hair, he pulled her closer, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. When they finally broke apart, Zara's eyes were bright, her cheeks flushed. "So much for waiting. We can still be careful." Professional in public, no distractions from the project. "Very responsible," she murmured, kissing him again. "Very sensible. I'm trying to do the right thing here. I know. That's one of the things I love about you." The word hung in the air between them, significant and terrifying. Zara seemed to realize what she'd said and pulled back slightly. "Too much?" she asked. "No," Alexander cupped her face in his hands. "Not too much, maybe just right." They spent the rest of the night in his office, talking and kissing and making plans for how they'd navigate a relationship while managing a major construction project. It was complicated and probably inadvisable and absolutely worth it. The following months were a delicate balance. In public, at construction sites, and in meetings with Harold and Richard, they maintained professional boundaries. In private, they were learning each other, building something that felt as solid as anything Alexander had ever constructed. Zara showed him her world, taking him to charity galas and family dinners, where he met generations of wealthy New Englanders who asked polite questions about his business while clearly wondering about his background. Alexander navigated these events with the same confidence he brought to construction sites, refusing to be intimidated by old money or family names that showed up in history books. In return, he showed her his world, taking her to the neighborhood where he'd grown up, introducing her to his siblings who still lived in modest homes and worked regular jobs. His sister Melissa had been suspicious at first, protective of her brother who'd made it out and worried that some rich woman would hurt him. But Zara had won her over by being genuine, asking real questions about their lives, and not performing interest but actually being interested. "She's good for you," Melissa told him later. "You're less intense when she's around, more human." "I'm always human." "You know what I mean. You've been so focused on building your business, proving yourself, that you forgot to actually live. She makes you live." It was true. With Zara, Alexander found himself taking evenings off, going to movies, having dinner at restaurants instead of eating takeout at his desk. She made him laugh, challenged him, supported him, and called him out when he was being stubborn or self-defeating. The resort project progressed through spring and into summer. What had started as architectural plans and financial projections was becoming something real, tangible. The main building was taking shape, a beautiful stone and timber structure that managed to feel both grand and welcoming. Zara visited the site constantly, watching her mother's vision come to life with an emotion she didn't try to hide. "She would have loved this," Zara said one evening as they stood watching the sunset over the lake, the partially completed resort rising behind them. "Every detail is exactly what she imagined. We're building it for her," Alexander said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "That matters. You matter." She turned to face him. "I know we agreed to keep this quiet until the project was finished, but I want my father to know. Richard already suspects something, and I'm tired of hiding how I feel about you. Are you sure? Harold might not be thrilled that his CFO is dating the contractor. My father will be thrilled that I'm happy, and he already likes you. Alexander, I'm not ashamed of this, of us. I don't want to hide anymore." So they told Harold over dinner at the estate. Zara's father listened as they explained that their relationship had developed over the course of the project, that they'd tried to maintain professional boundaries, but had realized they were building something more significant than a resort. Harold was quiet for a long moment, and Alexander braced himself for disapproval or concern about conflicts of interest. Instead, the older man smiled. "Finally. I was wondering when you two would figure it out. Marie and I have been watching you dance around each other for months." Zara blinked. "You knew, sweetheart. I've known you your entire life. I can tell when you're happy, and you've been happier these past few months than you've been since your mother died. And Alexander, you look at my daughter the way I looked at my wife, like she's the most remarkable thing you've ever seen." "She is," Alexander said simply. "Good answer." Harold raised his wine glass. "Your mother would have loved him," he told Zara softly. "She always said you needed someone who understood real work, real struggle, someone who'd appreciate what you've accomplished instead of taking it for granted." The approval meant more than Alexander had expected. He told himself he didn't need validation from Zara's family, but having it felt significant, like another barrier had fallen away. By October, the resort was nearly complete. The main building was finished, the guest cottages were being furnished, and the grounds had been landscaped according to the designs Zara's mother had sketched years earlier. It was beautiful, exceeding even their ambitious expectations. The official opening was planned for December, a soft launch with invited guests before the full public opening in the new year. Alexander's crews were working final details, perfecting every element. He'd never been more proud of a project, both for the quality of the work and for what it represented. It was a Friday evening in late October when Zara asked him to meet her at the resort site. The construction crews had left for the day, and the property was quiet, bathed in golden autumn light. She was waiting on the main building's terrace, looking out over the lake. "Remember when this was just forest and dreams," she said as he joined her. 18 months ago. Feels like longer. Feels like no time at all." She turned to face him, and there was something in her expression that made his heart race. "Alexander, I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen until I'm finished. Okay? When we started this project, I was doing it for my mother, fulfilling her dream, honoring her memory. That was everything. But somewhere along the way, it became about us two, about building something together that was ours as much as it was hers. You've made me believe in partnership, in letting someone else share the weight instead of carrying everything alone." She took his hand, holding it tightly. "I've spent my whole life trying to prove I was more than my last name, more than my family's money. And then I met you, and you never cared about any of that. You saw me, just me. You challenged me and respected me and made me want to be better, not to prove anything to anyone else, but because you made me want to be my best self." Alexander felt like his chest was too tight to breathe. "I love you," Zara continued. "I'm completely in love with you. And I know we come from different backgrounds, and maybe people will always judge us or assume things, but I don't care. I want to build a life with you. Not just buildings and projects, but a real life. Partnership, family, everything." He kissed her then, pouring everything he felt into it, all the love and gratitude and hope that had been building for months. "I love you too," he said when they finally broke apart. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and not because of this resort or the business connection. Because you make everything better. You make me better." "So what do we do now?" Alexander smiled. "We finish this project perfectly. We open this resort and watch it become everything your mother dreamed it would be, and then we figure out the rest together." "That sounds perfect." They stood on the terrace as the sun set, watching the light change across the lake, both of them knowing they'd built something that would last far beyond construction timelines and business partnerships. The resort opening in December was everything they'd hoped. Guests filled the main building, marveling at the elegant design, the attention to detail, the way luxury felt welcoming rather than intimidating. Harold gave a speech about his wife's vision and thanked Alexander for bringing it to life with such care and skill. Zara stood beside Alexander throughout the evening, and if anyone thought it was unusual that the CFO and the contractor seemed so close, nobody mentioned it. What people did notice was the quality of the work. Architecture and design magazines sent photographers. Hospitality industry publications wrote features. Bookings for the following year filled within weeks. The Pemberton Resort was an immediate success, exceeding even Harold's optimistic projections. On Christmas Eve, Alexander brought Zara back to the resort when it was quiet, most of the guests out for evening activities. He'd planned this carefully, wanting the setting to be perfect. They walked through the main hall, where a massive Christmas tree sparkled with lights. Zara had helped decorate it herself, insisting on being involved in every detail of the resort's first holiday season. "I have something for you," Alexander said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Zara's eyes went wide. "Alexander, let me say this before I lose my nerve." He took her hand. "A year and a half ago, you walked into my boardroom and asked better questions than anyone had ever asked about my business. You saw past my reputation to the actual work. You challenged me and pushed me and made me want to be worthy of your respect." He opened the box, revealing a ring, a simple but beautiful diamond that caught the Christmas lights. "Then you became my partner, not just in business but in everything. You showed me that where we come from doesn't matter as much as where we're going. That class and background are just details, not definitions. I never imagined I could have this, could have you, but now that I do, I can't imagine anything else." He took a breath. "Zara Nielson, will you marry me?" She was crying, happy tears that she didn't bother wiping away. "Yes. Absolutely yes." He slid the ring onto her finger and she threw her arms around him, kissing him with joy and promise and love. "My mother would have loved you," she whispered. "She would have been so happy. I wish I could have met her. She's here." Zara gestured to the resort around them. "In every detail, in everything we built together, she's here." They announced their engagement on Christmas Day at the Nielson estate, surrounded by family. Harold's eyes grew suspiciously bright, and he hugged Alexander hard enough to hurt. "Welcome to the family, son." Richard was enthusiastic in his support, already planning the bachelor party. Marie cried and fussed, and immediately began planning the wedding. Alexander's siblings were thrilled, descending on the estate with their families and quickly making themselves at home, much to Harold's delight. "Your family is wonderful," Zara told him later, watching as his nieces and nephews played in the estate's game room. "Loud and chaotic and wonderful. They're not used to houses this size, probably going to break something expensive. I hope they do. This house has been too quiet since Mom died. It needs noise and life and children running around." They were married in June at the resort, outdoors on the terrace overlooking the lake. It was a relatively small wedding by Nielson family standards, just 200 of their closest friends and family. Alexander's construction crew came, looking uncomfortable in suits, but clearly thrilled to be included. Zara's business associates mixed with his, creating interesting conversations about everything from luxury hospitality to commercial construction techniques. Melissa was Zara's maid of honor, a choice that had meant everything to Alexander. His sister had embraced Zara completely, grateful that her brother had found someone who made him genuinely happy. "You clean up nice, boss," Carlos called out during the reception, raising his beer in salute. "Thanks for not wearing steel-toed boots," Alexander replied, laughing. Harold gave a toast about love transcending expectations and building something stronger than any construction project. He spoke about his wife, about how she'd always believed that people were more than their circumstances, and how proud she would be to see her daughter marrying a man who embodied those values. Zara and Alexander danced under string lights as the sun set over the lake, in the place they'd built together, surrounded by everyone who mattered. "Happy?" Alexander asked. "Completely. I keep thinking I'll wake up and this will all be a dream. That I'll be back in that 2-bedroom apartment wondering how I'll make rent." Zara touched his face gently. "This is real. We're real. And whatever challenges come, we'll face them the way we've faced everything else, together." Their first year of marriage was an adjustment. They bought a townhouse in Manhattan, something that felt like both of them rather than trying to fit into either of their previous worlds. Alexander continued running Irving Construction Group, expanding into additional luxury projects that the Pemberton Resort's success had opened up. Zara continued as CFO of the Nielson family business while also consulting on Alexander's projects, their professional lives interweaving in ways that made both stronger. They disagreed sometimes, argued occasionally, but they'd learned each other well enough to navigate conflict without damage. Zara called him out when he worked too much or got too focused on proving himself. Alexander reminded her that her worth wasn't measured in quarterly reports and that taking time for herself wasn't selfish. In their second year of marriage, Zara discovered she was pregnant. They'd talked about children abstractly someday, but the reality was both terrifying and exhilarating. "What if I'm terrible at this?" Zara asked one night, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "You won't be. You're good at everything you commit to." Babies aren't construction projects or financial analysis. You can't solve them with spreadsheets. Alexander pulled her close. "No, but you can love them, and you're extraordinarily good at loving people. Look at how you've treated my family, how you've made my siblings and their kids feel welcomed and valued. You're going to be an amazing mother." Their daughter was born in October, tiny and perfect and utterly overwhelming. They named her Iris after Zara's mother. Harold cried when he held his granddaughter, seeing his wife in the baby's features. Parenthood changed them both in ways they hadn't anticipated. Alexander found himself understanding his own mother better, appreciating the sacrifices she'd made in ways he hadn't been able to when she was alive. Zara discovered reservoirs of patience and protectiveness she hadn't known she possessed. "She's going to have advantages we didn't have," Zara said one night, watching their daughter sleep in her crib. "Money, connections, opportunities. And she's going to understand that those things are tools, not definitions," Alexander replied. "We'll make sure she knows that value comes from what you build, not what you inherit." "You mean we'll let your mother's family keep her grounded while my father tries to spoil her rotten?" "Exactly." They stood together in the nursery. Two people from completely different backgrounds who'd built something beautiful together, not despite their differences, but because of them. The class barriers that should have kept them apart hadn't mattered in the face of genuine connection, mutual respect, and love. Irving Construction Group continued to grow, and Zara eventually started her own consulting firm, advising luxury hospitality companies on development and finance. They worked together when projects aligned and maintained separate professional identities when they didn't. Some people still whispered about the contractor who married money, but those whispers grew quieter as Alexander's reputation solidified, as his work spoke for itself. Their second child, A son they named David after Alexander's father, who'd left but whose absence had shaped him, was born 3 years after Iris. By then, they'd figured out the rhythm of balancing careers and family, of supporting each other through challenges and celebrating successes together. Harold retired when David was 2, handing over the Nielson family business to Richard and officially bringing Zara in as a partner. She'd proven herself beyond any doubt, and the business thrived under their leadership. Alexander's company secured several high-profile international projects, building his reputation as one of the premier construction executives in the luxury market. But the best moments weren't the professional triumphs or the financial successes. They were Saturday mornings with the kids, teaching Iris about building blocks and watching David discover his mother's talent for numbers. They were Sunday dinners at the estate with Harold and Marie and Alexander's siblings, and a growing collection of nieces and nephews. They were quiet evenings on their townhouse balcony, reviewing plans and sharing wine and talking about everything and nothing. 10 years after they'd first met in that Manhattan boardroom, Alexander and Zara stood once again at the Pemberton Resort. They'd come to celebrate the property's 10th anniversary, a milestone that had exceeded everyone's expectations. The resort had won countless awards, been featured in international publications, and consistently ranked among the top luxury destinations in the country. "Do you remember what you said to me the night we got engaged?" Zara asked, standing on the same terrace where he'd proposed. "I said a lot of things that night. You said where we come from doesn't matter as much as where we're going. I remember. You were right, but you were also wrong." She turned to face him. "Where we came from shaped us. Your background taught you resilience and determination. Mine taught me responsibility and the value of using resources wisely. We brought all of that together, and that's what made us strong." Alexander pulled her close. "So what you're saying is I was half right?" "I'm saying you were completely right about what matters. We built something real together, multiple somethings. This resort, our company, our family. We proved that class is just circumstances, not destiny." Their kids ran out onto the terrace, Iris now 9 and David 6, both of them confident and curious and loved beyond measure. Harold followed more slowly, older now but still sharp, delighted by his grandchildren and proud of what his daughter and son-in-law had built. "Grandpa says there's cake," Iris announced. "Special anniversary cake." "Then we should definitely have cake," Zara said, taking her daughter's hand. As they walked back into the resort, surrounded by family and standing in a place they'd built together, Alexander reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From demolition sites and boardrooms to this moment, everything had led to exactly where they were supposed to be. He thought he was building a business when he started Irving Construction Group, creating financial security and proving his worth. He'd had no idea he was actually building a path toward Zara, toward a family, toward a life richer than any amount of money could create. Class hadn't come between them because they'd understood something fundamental. People are more than their bank accounts or their backgrounds. They're what they choose to build, how they choose to love, the legacy they choose to leave. And the legacy they were building together, in the children they were raising and the partnership they'd forged and the love they shared, was more valuable than any construction project or business deal could ever be. "I love you," Zara said softly as they rejoined their family. "I love you too," Alexander replied. "Always have, always will." And surrounded by everyone who mattered, in the place where their story had truly begun, they celebrated not just a resort's anniversary, but the life they'd built together, the family they'd created, and the love that had proven stronger than any barrier society might have placed between them. The story of the CEO from a poor background and the woman from wealth had become something more meaningful than either of them had imagined. A story of partnership, of building something lasting, of understanding that love and respect transcend circumstances. They'd proven that where you start doesn't determine where you end up, that class differences are just details in a larger story, and that the most important thing you can build isn't made of steel and stone but of trust, commitment, and love. Years would continue to pass, children would grow, businesses would evolve, but the foundation they'd built together remained solid, unshakable, proof that two people from different worlds could create something extraordinary when they chose to see each other for who they truly were, not where they'd come from. And in that understanding, in that choice to build together rather than let circumstances divide them, they'd found not just success, but genuine happiness, the kind that couldn't be measured or quantified, only lived and loved and cherished every day.